You're listening to Tune Dig, a conversation between two lifelong friends about the power of music, one album at a time. I'm Cliff Seal.
And I'm Kyle Stapleton. Each episode, we talk about a single album in depth, unpacking it through conversation to understand what makes it worth appreciating, and learning a little bit about life along the way.
If you're listening for the first time because we're covering an artist or a record you love, we promise you'll learn something new or gain a new perspective by the end of the episode.
And if you've stuck with us for multiple episodes, you know by now that you're bound to expand your horizons as we share clear entry points for artists you may never have tried to get into before.
We're talking about ObZen by Meshuggah.
What if we told you, dear listener, friend of the podcast, that in less than an hour, you could change the way you thought about music? If you listen to this podcast, you're already a fan of music, and you are probably where we have been in various parts of our lives and friendship, where you don't know where the unknown is going to come from. You don't know how to break out of the, here's what Spotify recommended, here's my friend that drug me to the same concert. You've been in a 2-year bubble hell of listening to the same things. I don't know. Maybe you had a kid. Maybe you stopped being friends with somebody. I don't know. If you need a sign that it is a moment in time to break out of your comfort zone and push beyond the things you thought you knew, we certainly hope this episode can be the thing. This is another band that we both love, like last episode.
To be fair, you might hate it endlessly.
Totally.
But there's also a pretty good chance you can end up discovering something that you probably wouldn't have given yourself the chance to listen to, unless we had maybe given you an on-ramp here, or someone else gives you an on-ramp.
The worst case scenario, I think, if you really love music, and if you don't, why are you listening to this podcast? There's plenty of serial killer stuff out there. If you really love music, the worst case scenario is that you'll be like, this is not for me, but I appreciate it. And I'm thinking a little differently because of it. My bold hypothesis is that for any avid music fan, this record, ObZen, belongs near the top of an albums to listen to before you die list, period. Like of all music. And it's not just coming from me or us. Alternative Press, for example, is probably the clearest, most pointed backer in that they named Meshuggah the #1 most important band in metal in 2004. And for a community like metal, you're not as intimately connected to that community as we are. That's a community with a lot of opinions. And to say something as the #1 most important anything when it did not come anywhere near starting the thing is a bold claim. I would go so far as to say Meshuggah is the best and most important band in heavy music. And in many ways, even though I like all of the stuff they've put out since immensely, this is as perfect an entry point as you're going to get for the stuff this band is doing. So TLDR, there's something to appreciate if you're a music fan at almost every level here, because this is human creativity pushing the limits of what is possible. Or as you said at one point, this music is a mindfuck, but could not possibly be more rewarding. So I have some essential questions to guide us through what is going to be some challenging stuff to get into. Any thoughts before we dive in?
No, carry on.
Hello, not to put you on the spot. So you, sir, what do you think about Meshuggah?
What am I, on a podcast or something?
Are there hidden cameras?
No, I've just been waiting my whole life for someone to ask me if I've got anything to say about Meshuggah. But I'll let you carry on with your questions.
That's what the past 3 or 4 years of this podcast have been leading up to. Just a big long con to get you.
Yep, this is the ploy.
To give you a platform for talking about Meshuggah. In a couple of sentences, why do you love Meshuggah? What is the magic of Meshuggah for you?
I'm going to hate myself for this, but it's the right response. In the recent Spider-Man film.
Oh my God, I almost did a spit take.
Okay, in the recent Spider-Man film, Doctor Strange is trapping old Spider-Man in some crazy mirror dimension shit. Okay, please put this to the side for a moment. There's an interaction they have where whatever. Doctor Strange is doing some crazy like geometric stuff with the world. He is like folding matter according to the comic books. Okay. So
that's how I like to spend my Saturday, doing some geometric shit with the world.
I wish I could do more geometric shit,
Totally.
honestly. Yeah. So
go to Home Depot.
Anyway, they're two heroes and they're like fake fighting or whatever. They're having an anticlimactic moment or something. Anyway, old Tom says, you know what's cooler than magic? Math. And he says it like an 8-year-old because that's his normal tone. But his point was, and in that moment, you could kind of see it visually, like what had appeared to be a series of like infinite and random shapes and things that were kind of folding out of each other were kind of shown to be like, well, like that's like a Fibonacci sequence, right? That's like a golden ratio. And so that moment was a little bit of like weird cheese, but it was tying together this idea, which we see plenty of times in nature, in existence, right? Like magic and complexity is a placeholder for something we haven't figured out how to understand in a way that makes us comfortable yet. And so to me, so much of why I am really sincerely glad we're talking about it, but to your point, like about the magic of this band, like
science is just validated witchcraft.
I mean, yeah, that's a better ending than I was going to have.
You either get burned at the stake or you live long enough to see yourself get published in a publication.
But yeah, I mean, I think, yes, math is cooler than magic, but what it's helpful for here is like a basic understanding of seeming complexity kind of helps you like take these layers of what feels like randomness away from things that you are encountering, that you're about to encounter musically. If you haven't listened to this band before, this is almost certainly going to be something different than you were expecting to hear or planned to hear. It feels constantly like entropy. It feels like the wheels are always falling off. And all that ends up happening is you find out that the wheelbase is actually just like 4 miles long. This bus is like a lumbering caterpillar that goes down the highway.
It's a tank in that way.
Yeah. So I love that we're going to try to at least unfold this enough because it's not just some sort of clever intellectual exercise. There are like deep things about music and about the nature of collaboration and creativity and like what unfolds from basic simplicity. Like all of that is like embedded. And this is one of the several records they've put out that really put a cap on that, I think.
So I suspect if you're tuning into this episode, you're in one of two camps. You're extremely into this band, or you've heard of them and you're curious, but haven't broken on through to the other side yet.
Yeah, maybe you saw that Wolf of Wall Street meme and you're like, man, what are they jumping up and down to? That is tight.
What is going on there? What song was that? Was that Bleed?
No.
Was it Rational Gaze, maybe?
Yeah.
Man, I got to rewatch Wolf of Wall Street now. So I would say, like the previous episode, to a different degree, you are extremely in the former camp. You love this band. This is one of your favorite bands at top 5.
I don't know how
easily.
to not love this band. So yeah, sure.
I am in the latter camp approaching the former. Seen them with you a number of times. I would self-describe as a fan of this band, but when I really sit down and think about it, I rarely make it all the way through a Meshuggah record. They're extremely physical to listen to. It is pretty intense. It sort of demands your attention. And I've only just started to like break through into the world. I was making the joke right before we started recording that I can like casually be in the kitchen flipping a turkey burger and just, oh yeah, Stinga. Yeah. All right, let's do it. Like In Death is Death. Hey Google, play In Death is Death while and also pull up a recipe for turkey burger.
It does have to be loud enough though, or else it'll just sound like your fridge has started vibrating.
That's right. That's right. They have a very interesting sound for sure. So, and if you're in the third camp that I don't think is probably tuned in, where you've never heard of this band and you're just following this podcast episode to episode for the joy of music discovery, congratulations. You're mythological to both of us, and we would love to meet you. So
That's literally true.
So please tweet or Instagram DM us or whatever.
Especially if this episode is successful.
Yeah. Because that's amazing. And that very rarely happens with this podcast as it is. But I can see somebody reading the episode description for this and like Googling Meshuggah and then being like, you know what? Hell no.
Came for Sturgill Simpson, stayed for Meshuggah.
Janelle Monáe. Honestly, if there's any train that gets you on this podcast from Janelle Monáe to Meshuggah, and then in a couple episodes, you're going to go to Olivia Rodrigo with us. Honest to God, we would love to buy you a beer, like truly, sincerely. And if you don't live in our city, then we will Venmo you. I will Venmo you money for a beer and cheers you on FaceTime. Cliff will not participate in any of those activities because I'm
off the grid.
That's a social construct nightmare. But I will do all of those things because that's amazing. So anyway, there are enormous fans of this band. They are a band's band for sure, which we'll get into. But I think on any level, there's something to appreciate. Like, this is just a cool band. And this is a band, like, this is a group of musicians at the height of their powers on this record. And I think you can sense it from the first note to the very last. So if you're like, I hate metal, I hate technical or mathy stuff, I cannot get into any of this on a sonic level in any way. Hopefully you can take away just the sensation of human creativity at work, because it is astounding and it is invigorating. It's hard not to be energized, in my opinion, when you listen to this band, but especially this record.
I'd even add a little bit in support too, especially if you are not connecting to this musically. At least hear us out about some of the really cool ways that they write this music. It's at the very least, in my opinion, one of the more interesting things we could talk about in terms of songwriting. And in fact, was like my entire initial contact with this band was a guitar magazine when I was a kid, and they talked about how Meshuggah, which I'm sure we'll talk about some more, but how this band from Sweden was writing music and recording it separately. And like, they didn't use this word, but like asynchronously. They were basically like writing portions of songs and then sending them on to the next person for that next person to then iterate on top of what they had done. But the original person had received more from another band member, which they were now iterating on. And it was basically just these concentric circles of people rewriting each other's parts until they like landed on something. And I was like, that's the wildest thing I've ever heard in my whole life. Like, you know, this is early 2000s, probably. No, this had to have been in the late 90s when I read about it. It's like, how are they even getting this music back and forth to one another? And it captured my entire imagination. So there's literally a lot to love here.
Thanks for coming to my conference talk. The future of work is Meshuggah. So I want to pose 3 questions in John Oliver fashion for us to answer about Meshuggah.
#feminism.
Now I want to. What is the one where he gets the painting of the 2 rats having sex? What's that for that?
It's a weird thing to explore verbally, but
bless his writers. So question 1, what the hell is going on here? Let's talk about what makes Meshuggah unique, fundamentals of their sound, their approach to structure. 2, how the hell do you arrive at this kind of music? What you were just alluding to. Let's talk a little bit about their writing and recording process, the evolution of the band that got them to this point, because ObZen is their 6th record and they're 89 to 08. They're 20 years in at this point in their career. And then how in the hell do you hang in there with this, right? If you're in the camp like me, where you're like, I can do 7 minutes of Meshuggah at a time, and then that's all the concentrating I can do for the day. Please and thanks. So let's try to arrive at some deep listening or music appreciation moments. Because I think if you're like me, certainly, and you're not like a Cliff where you're classically trained, or you can just like sit with longer passages of music and hang with what's happening in a cycle. It's nice to be able to point to very small moments and build your way up, like exercise your way into Meshuggah a little bit.
Yeah, I imagine most people don't think about math equations in their spare time casually. So I wouldn't expect everyone
You literally
to love.
do the Zach Galifianakis gif at the casino with the math in front of you, or Winona Ryder on stage at the Oscars, depending on the day.
I started thinking about it. I've got to finish the thought. So
Your
yeah.
own personal Rain Man.
No thanks. So your first question was, what the hell?
What the hell is going on here? What is the Meshuggah sound? Why does it sound like they're playing in different time signatures at the same time? Why can I never count off with this band? Why does it make no sense to brain, but groove, feel good, and heart?
I feel like of all the material that exists relative to this band in general right now, there's plenty of ways to go on the let's take you one step at a time all the way through how to start to begin to look at. Let's just cut to the chase on a few things, okay? Because I think it better answers your what the hell question. This is more or less what happens when two things are true. One of them we already talked about. When instead of everyone in a band assuming their very particular role and sticking inside of it, if instead a band thought of themselves as a collective of people who could write a series of pieces of music and had access to writing whichever portions of that music they wanted to and did it collaboratively. So if you have that approach to writing music combined with, this is where we'll try to take a different approach than everyone else. I am being sincere. There are plenty of explainer videos on YouTube for understanding Meshuggah counting, and they are literally better than we could do right now because they add a visual element, which will help you if you're not already naturally finding the beat. So let's cut to the chase of that. You can find the simplicity in this music. It's just contained in slightly different places than you'd expect. So usually the snare or the cymbal is doing a basic 4/4 thing almost all the time. You can find it's extremely headbangable music. I wish there was a better adjective, but you can find the rhythm. It's just it's not in the kick drums. It's not in the guitars ever. It's not there. It's hidden in snares and cymbals, but it's always just basic iterations on 4/4 time that go out in longer phrases. And, we can talk about this a little bit more, but effectively what you're hearing when you hear Meshuggah, especially as they progressed after the first few records and they moved from a thrashier direction into more of this, what ObZen really became a kind of masterclass in. They're really just taking their time, making small tweaks on very long phrases that overlap at mathematical intervals, which if that sounds dorky, just please, the music is overlapping moments at mathematical intervals. So all they're doing is taking different numbers, and all of a sudden you have, a sense of factorial numbers. Because in order to start understanding Meshuggah, on first listen, so to speak, what you'll start doing eventually is realizing okay, they're doing this 7 times, then 5, then 3, then 5, then 7, 3, 3. And then you start to get the feel for adding those numbers together. And if I've already lost you, then that's not the right way to approach it yet. And that's okay. Let it unveil itself to you. For people who are interested in it from that angle, totally start there. Start counting.
Yep.
Start trying to figure it out. And you can start with track 1 on this record because it starts 1/16 off the actual rhythm. Just when you talk about from the first note of this just kind of being exactly what they were trying to do, literally, I laughed when you said that.
Yeah.
Because literally the first note of this, they are throwing you off the very first beat you'll ever encounter on the song.
The same way last episode you talked about Torches Together being a litmus of will I or will I not get this band or be into it. Combustion tells you everything you need to know about Meshuggah at any point before or after in their discography. It's sort of the best little thesis statement, I think, still in their career of all of the things that they've tried to do. Old and new. It's the perfect inflection point of older, thrashier, and newer, groovier or whatever. It's a ripper. I thought I was weird for a long time when I didn't understand a band like Meshuggah or Between the Buried and Me or jazz fusion, to be like, how do they remember how to do this? Like, I always had the sensation, like, I'll never be a real musician because there's a way that they know to talk about how to do 5 and then 3 and then 7 and then whatever or James Brown and the JBs even, right? It's like, they at least would shout it out. So I knew it was like, do 7 now. And so I always felt too boneheaded for music like this because of that inherently. But just knowing that is a part of this band's process they'll write it with the math in mind. You know, they'll essentially like program it into the drum machine. And I know we'll talk about that, but they write beyond capabilities of human thinking or like natural design of human thinking a little bit. And then they essentially have to memorize it like when you memorize a poem in school. So that was heartening to me. And then layering that on top of it's all 4/4. It's all Chuck Berry rock and roll at the end of the day. So I want to like double down and have people really hear we write it in a weird way. And then we play what's written. Like, we don't write it from playing it or jamming it out. Like Thomas Haka said explicitly, we don't jam. And you talked about the asynchronous thing, but it's just like, that is fundamentally different than most bands with guitar, bass, and drums. It seems very inorganic, but they've made it organic to them. And I also appreciate that approach has made them the subject of study. Like, there is an academic paper that you shared with me.
I assure you that was one of many.
They are on the curriculum I learned at Berklee College and at Musicians Institute, listed in Meshuggah's bio. They are proud of that. They both incorporate Meshuggah's back catalog into their curriculum because it's such a crucial element in any modern musical education. So Meshuggah is a band that helps musicians think about music, but fundamentally it has a solid, recognizable groove underpinning. So start like me, start like a caveman if you aren't sure. And just, I really do think the counting off thing and just like learning to catch little elemental moments, or just even counting off to where do they drop off at the end of this. I'm not going to be able to catch the whole thing, whatever, but I know when they do blank. Oh yes, I got it. You know, and just kind of working your way up from there. It gets to be a fun. It's like doing the New York Times crossword a little. You know, it gets to be a fun. Oh, I'm getting smarter at this. Like, my muscles are getting better at it. And even if you don't play an instrument, you start to feel more like a musician. You get your musical sensibilities built up by finding the way they come in and out of these things. It's very unique. Like, it's designed in a way that attunes you to thinking about musicality more than, and it's the opposite of jazz, right? Like, it's extremely not improvised. So that to me makes it feel more architectural, makes it like you should be thinking about the math of it, or you're capable of thinking about the math of it because it was structured to be so.
The opposite of jazz is a really good way of putting it, actually. We had not really talked about that before. Yeah, not in the sense that the outcome seems opposite, but that the approach to it is literally fundamentally
diametrically opposite.
It's like inverted. To your points as well about feeling like how could someone like memorize this too? It is phenomenological. Okay. I think I aced it. As someone who plays Meshuggah songs on the guitar, after a certain amount of repetition, which I'm sure in no way matches the repetition they clearly have, right? After a certain amount of it gets in your bones the way that Jimmy Page's guitar work gets in your bones, where he's not actually following much about what's under the rhythm. You know, he's talking to you with his Les Paul. And so in a similar way, enough repetition makes this band drony. And if nothing else, I would really encourage people to, if you're running out of ways to kind of hear this music, try to find a volume and an EQ setting that kind of flattens everything enough to where you can feel this more like drone if you don't like all the angles of it, because the pure repetition and length of it, if you will let it and you can identify with it, I don't want to pretend everyone can, but if you can connect with it, it becomes very meditative, extremely meditative.
100%.
Yeah. And it, so to your point, like so how do I find the rhythm in this? How do I find my breath in a Meshuggah song?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I mentioned at the beginning, but like literally this is true. And we can play like combustion here to start with, to show you don't follow the guitar. Listen for either cymbals or snares. There's always going to be a backbeat. Like there's a perceivable regular 4/4 beat 98% of the time in any Meshuggah song. And that's part of what makes it like it almost comes across like condescending and insulting sometimes, that like everyone talks to Meshuggah and it's like, have you seen all these papers we did on you? And they're like, we write 4/4 songs. Like, okay, yeah, jackass. Like, I know. And like they do it. There is no tongue in cheekness of it either. Like there is a sincerity to their like iteration on something simple, but really that should just encourage you that if you feel like I'm not getting it and I want to, it's there.
Yeah.
Take a deep breath because it's there. And in fact, I had written down that to me, I think like understanding the rhythm, especially behind Meshuggah, think of it less like you can get this cipher that helps you understand what's going on or what the intent is or something like that. And think about the mathematics of it or the rhythm of it more like, if you remember those like 90s auto stereogram things where like you could see a shitty spaceship while you were staring at something that looked like static. Okay. So, you know, they would tell you just like stare at this picture for a really long time and eventually it'll
Magic eye.
Yeah. Magic eye. Yeah. And eventually it'll unveil itself to you. Man, we were laughing about Seinfeld. There's a Seinfeld episode for this too. But like when you realize that you could just cross your eyes and do it immediately, like that's sort of more of what understanding the rhythm here is like. Now, it's not going to like unfold into some like lotus flower of deep philosophical meaning. You're just going to go, oh, this
Stop
riff is...
trying to surf and just surf.
Yeah.
The less you do, the more you do.
The more you understand it, the more you just go, oh, that's a heavy riff, dude.
Yeah.
That's killer.
Yeah.
And then you just love the downbeat of the whole thing. And so like the treasure is just like by default being able to find your snare and your cymbal or whatever that's carrying the regular beat and just be able to chill to all of these songs the way that you would to like a good hip hop song.
Yeah.
Like that's what unlocking it feels like. There's no like nerd treasure at the end of this, which is why I do appreciate Thomas, the drummer in the band especially, but like anyone who gets interviewed from this band, there's no like, it's not like The Secret or like whatever Creed fucking Quest or whatever that thing was where they were like, if you love our band enough, you'll find this box hidden beneath a tree in a field and it'll have like the ultimate Creed knowledge. Do you remember that?
Are you talking about the band Creed?
Do you not know about this?
No.
They had a real like, it was like almost like a Death Grips level go chase things out in the world. Oh my God. No, I think it was called Creed Quest.
All of that and the reward is more of the band Creed.
Oh man,
if life is
we're
pointless,
really gonna have to
point taken. Say amen.
We're gonna have to follow up on this, bud.
Jesus Christ.
Shit. Oh, that's giving me a lot of joy. So be encouraged that like the reward to liking this music is just like finding music that's super dope and no one else writes anything about it.
So I want to push in on you describing this as chill, which one is an extremely you thing to say.
My fault.
This is a core aspect of your personality, but also not wrong. And I think validated by the personalities of the band members. And when they do interviews, they are so, Johnny Cash, we'd play faster if we could. Just sort of like, we just do whatever we want. We play what we want, when we want, how we want, whatever. There's an interview quote with one of the guys. It's normally Thomas that does the interview. So anytime it's not him, I'm intrigued by it. And there was one interview where one of the guys said, with each new album, we're looking for something different and something that we haven't done before. We're kind of on the opposite side of the spectrum as AC/DC. They want to do that same record over and over and over, and they kind of have to, or their fans would throw a fit. We have to challenge ourselves and come up with something we haven't heard before and done ourselves before. So I think there's a chill thing, a Zen thing in the way that they're just sort of pursuing an ideology, and it happens to be with the sound because they like the way this stuff sounds.
Yeah.
It's heavy, it's cool, it's whatever, but there's a noble farmer like approach to the way they keep chipping away and unveiling this idea of how far can you break apart this one groove? How many different ways can you fractalize it until it's unrecognizable and not us anymore?
Mm-hmm.
And they've explored that in different ways over 25, 30-year career. But the longer that you lock into the straight aheadness of that, like the more self-evident it all becomes.
Yeah. And critically, and one of the reasons we wanted to pick and talk about ObZen is everything you're hearing, although apparently written digitally, was recorded really.
Right.
Okay. So that was not always true of all of their other records for a number of reasons, but it's really critical to note that like the boundary of their music in general is like, for real though, can we actually play this? Because the like critical piece of this whole puzzle, and probably the reason that they've reached legendary status of this magnitude in this community, I like that called the metal community, a community. That's fun. All of the fuck bunches of people who love metal, but like they execute all of their songs with machine level perfection live every single time without fail. I have seen this band a lot. You've seen them a lot with me. I've never heard an off note to have gone from,
which is like, okay, I'm not looking for that
right
when I go see a band for the record.
Right.
I want to hear the imperfection and the humanity and the whatever, and wouldn't mind it if I heard it with Meshuggah. But the fact that you go again and again and you just hear it so airtight, full and alive, though, it's not like a replication of the record in that sense. It's like, oh man, they are doing it. It blows your mind.
It feels unnatural.
It feels unnatural. It feels like you are in the presence of something otherworldly while it's happening.
Yeah, like Rockafire spawned something new, and there's like these new Swedish adults up there playing perfectly. It's disconcerting almost. Yeah. And on top of it, I mean, well, I consider this my full-throated endorsement to go to any Meshuggah show at any point, not only because of how great they are, but like they attract greatness related to all this music. So like the guy who does their lights is like incredible. We'll make sure and like link up his YouTube stuff or whatever. But like even seeing their show, you have to picture in your head the complexity of the music we're already trying to describe. On top of that being performed live, like, yeah, to a click track, but everybody performs to a click track. That doesn't make it magical or easy. Like, so it's played in perfect time. Everyone's executing their parts perfectly, but then there is a literally programmed light show for every moment of every song that they play. And like, I'm not talking about there's a light guy back there who is a Meshuggah fan who changes them when he knows a good beat's coming in. I'm talking about every moment of every song is fully programmed by an expert who is not only very good at lights, but like knows every particular meticulous rhythm in every song and is like writing visual art to accompany it. So then you see yet again live, you're seeing the iterations of the iterations of the iterations. And now you're seeing on top of it, another medium of iteration on top of that. Like, it's a fractal thing that exists like conceptually in reality.
When you watch their light show, it reminds you that there is geometry in all living things, in the sacred design of the universe or whatever. It's a very high thought, but it's impossible not to have it when you're watching their live show because you're just like, oh my God. It's a lot for your senses in the best possible way. I mean, all of it. The lighting, the music, whatever. I kept coming back to the analogy of pro athletes. Like everything about the Meshuggah journey is like the way pro athletes approach their craft, where the things that they write, the experiments that they try to design in creating their music, they use that mechanism to push beyond the limitations of their brain and the physiology of, can I perform this? So you have something like the kick pattern in Bleed, which I know we'll talk more about Bleed. That's a thing you write in the computer, and then you worry about, oh, can I play it? And then you take 5 months to learn the 7 minutes of kick pattern activity just for that. The same way that you would train for the Olympics. Like this is just Olympic level dedication to musical craft. The paradox in Meshuggah, I think, is the focus, right? When you listen to it, it comes across on its face as extraordinarily complex, but it's really simple ideas executed in a way that's different than what we're used to experiencing in music, right? But their focus on the way that they do things is so relentless. And that's what I really appreciate about it, right? And when you think about the idea of focus or reductionism or intent, or like trying to hone in on one thing, like just finding the breath of Meshuggah. I love that phrasing. It all becomes very Zen, right? When you strip away all of there's 72 things I need to be thinking about because of the weird meter and the lyrics and the tone and the whatever. And it's like, just do one thing. Just focus on the snare or the cymbal and work your way outward next time.
Yeah.
Like, man, that is extremely rewarding. It's like a glass of cold water when you're listening to music. And I think in that way, it does become very chill after a number of repetitions, because studies have shown you should just listen to stuff that you are familiar with to help you go to sleep rather than a certain type of music. It's the same thing, right? It's just the vibrations are helping you dial in a certain thing in your brain. It's whereas familiar music is an indica that helps you go to sleep, Meshuggah is the ultimate sativa.
Yeah. And if you've ever smoked too much sativa right before you were trying to go to sleep, you'll understand the sensation that can happen if you kind of hit this wrong. Because it'll just be like,
oh God, do I need to get up and clean my kitchen now?
And also, does my kitchen exist in time? You know, really, when you think about it, isn't the kitchen already clean?
Which kitchen? Do I still live in this house at this place, or is it my childhood home? Is it going to be my childhood kitchen if I get up and go out and investigate? And what is it going to mean to my psyche?
And since I'm here, what can I say to my young psyche to really bring him along?
Hey, man, got any taquitos?
Hey, man, we'll clean this kitchen later. All right, Kyle.
Interstellar, 2011.
One really cool thing about the length of the phrases that they have means that not only is there some sort of originally intended rhythmic synchronicity, but by the time you're getting to the the raw length of phrase that they are, there ends up being a lot of times like multiple ways for you to hear the rhythm because it's so big. So like to give like just one example, even off of Nothing, someone was breaking down the first 30 seconds of Rational Gaze, right? And they said, so just follow me for a second here. The guitars and the bass can be grouped into 4 repetitions of measures in 25/16, followed by a measure in 28/16. The entire passage is then repeated. While this is going on, the cymbals create a metric superimposition as the kick drum doubles the guitar and bass rhythms. The cymbals maintain a consistent quarter note pulse, complemented by snare drum hits on what would be beat 3 in 4/4 time. So I feel like that's a really good example of fuck that, dude. The cymbal, just listen to the cymbals. Just listen to the cymbals. There's a million unfolding fractals in all this, and you can care, but you don't have to. And that's like, that is itself like so much of the beauty of this record, and why it's especially interesting why in ObZen, having the boundary of not only, you know, are we going to want to play these songs live, but we're going to literally record them all as is. It's one of the reasons this one itself is worth focusing on, because you get all of this complexity, like I just spit out, that came from one of those research papers we wrote about. Like that came from recasting metal rhythm and meter in the metal of Meshuggah. So it's the combination of that level of possible complexity combined with like the reality of them having written a badass song and being able to play it that makes this album itself like this really interesting moment in metal. Because Bleed became this like, I mean, seriously, just search YouTube for like Bleed drum covers. Game changer is such a terrible word, right? But like, it shifted the feeling and sensation of what was possible in technical music at once. And it's one of those things where, Kyle, you and I like to, or you at least indulge me in talking about how like, it's so fascinating to me that like we can never go more macro or micro without discovering some other level of thing we've never seen before.
Right.
And like, to me, this is a great example of that. Like you can go into Bleed specifically and go watch yourself a YouTube counting video about Bleed. And you'll find out that what they did was it's not triplets, which is what people will say it is. It's 4 notes. And the first like 2 are stacked really close together in close succession. And then what they're doing from there is taking that little drum pattern and then they add 2 extra notes to that drum pattern. And then they add 2 more and then they repeat it. And like you can unfold all of these numbers, and it's interesting if you care about the numbers. If it's not, you don't need to. Instead, all you can appreciate, or all you need to appreciate, is the fact that this human being can play this song with perfection and wrote it on the first time that they came back to an album that they decided that they wanted to record live. And like, that's sort of like the nature of the way that Meshuggah, I think, changes things in music, and why anyone might consider them a most important band, despite them clearly not being Metallica or any of the other ones you might want to kind of give that title to. I mean, for one thing, they've been around almost as long, and they've had a pretty storied career, just not the same commercial success. But like when they decide to do things, they change the entire genre of music and new things unfold out from them, which like we will spend precisely 0 time talking about all the shitty gent bands that have come out of this, not only because there's no reason to, but because there's plenty of other people who will indulge that. But like, that's just one of the million different little fractals that come out from the music that these folks make. And especially even just a song like Bleed, where we've talked a little bit about their songwriting process and all that. Like one of the ways to appreciate this record in particular is that ObZen, like we've mentioned, was kind of the first time that they had gone back to saying we need to be able to record this live. Well, they had on Catch 33 right before this, they had pushed boundaries in a totally different way, where Catch 33 is effectively one song that's subdivided up into these parts, but they reuse and invert patterns from one song in a different song entirely, because it's all one song, right? And so they're not only stretching at that point music and rhythm like they already are, they're stretching the concept of song itself. They're stretching out the length of phrase. Like, how long can you go before you remember that you heard a phrase before? And that includes the actual lyrics and the vocal styles. Like, they were all literally trying to work with a piece of music that was basically like a hall of mirrors. And that recording itself, they had done entirely on a computer. Like, literally, the drums were not played live in the way that most of us conceptualize recording drums. No one sat in front of the drums and literally recorded the written songs. Instead, they, for those unfamiliar, like they just recorded individual drum hits and then mapped those to MIDI notes on a computer, which is a pretty common thing at this point, but was not used
in the early 2000s.
Yeah, it's certainly not to the extent that they did. And so they separated out all of those individual notes with different levels of, think about how a snare drum sounds different when you hit it hard versus soft. All of those are recorded and collected and collated and whatever, and then applied to specific notes and intensity and all this stuff, which meant that they could write out in basically like dot notation what they wanted to do on, yes, guitar and all that stuff, but especially drums. And that whatever they decided to end up with on the computer, whether a human being could play it or not, would sound reasonably similar to a human being playing it. And then on top of that, which is its own story, I mean, I feel like we could really do some dork shit talking about like the little things that Meshuggah spawned. But I mean, they would go on to help productize that thing that they used to record Catch 33, which is called Drum Kit from Hell, which then again created this entirely new ecosystem of how metal got written at all. Like, I don't want to draw too direct a line because I can't fact check myself on it, but like bands like Agoraphobic Nosebleed, who all of a sudden could be one guy in an apartment, or like Cloud Kicker, like guys, or not always guys, but like singular artists could now reasonably record their own drums without ever having to learn to play the instrument at all. And instead, we're learning a new way to think about rhythm entirely. And so, like, that's sort of why we get so, like, wound up about this band and why it's, like, at least important to acknowledge their kind of place in reality. Because, like, the album right before the one we're talking about sort of, like, changed metal on its own just by, like, talking about what they did and sharing it. And then you come back to this record, and yet again, they write a song like Bleed, which becomes this instant, like, this is the new bar for if you're actually a good drummer or not. You can play this kick pattern in Bleed, which is insane.
And probably their fourth sort of watershed moment to that point.
Yeah.
So the first one being Destroy, Erase, Improve, showing that there were still, so that was mid 90s, right? That was like 95. So 15 odd years into the thrash experiment, showing that you could take it still to smarter, more intense places. Obviously, they were heavily influenced by Bay Area bands like Metallica. They name check. They often say they try not to have influences. They try to be a band that doesn't work from influences. But when they do name check, they often name check Metallica and the Bay Area scene and the bands that influence Metallica, like specifically the new wave of British heavy metal, Saxon, Priest, Sabbath, and on. So DEI, which is, it's kind of weird that that's the acronym for that record. And then Chaosphere in the same vein. And then in 2002, they put out Nothing, which I was trying to decipher before we started recording how I'd first come across Meshuggah. And I think it was a Headbangers Ball comp where they were on the end of disc 2 of the Discovery bands, and Rational Gaze was on there. So they subverted their own sound and like went slow, so to speak. But Nothing is a super heavy record. And you have songs like Spasm on there that are down tuned and start to sort of get at things that they would start doing later. And then you get into so Nothing was a whole big thing. Took everything in a new direction. And I think we specifically mean reiterating that they are a band's band, right? Other big bands heard Meshuggah do this new thing or played on a festival with them and have said as much in interviews like that, man, that is the band. They are the high watermark. So then they did which which was the predecessor to Catch 33, and I think your entry point.
Yeah, if that helps you understand me at all, I listen to which is one song from Meshuggah that goes on for
one track, not like Catch 33 where it's one piece of music broken up. It is one 24-minute.
Yeah, 21 minutes.
Yeah.
And I remember listening to it on the way to high school one morning and just going, yes. Like, yes.
This is me now.
This makes... Mom, Dad, I've changed. I'm Meshuggah EP.
That was its own thing. And, you know, they talked in the making of Catch 33 that like some of that stuff was physically impossible to play, and they weren't really worried about that. They were just trying to make the record that they heard in their heads. And then having the like vacuum sealed lab experiment drum machine from hell, impossible to play record. This was sort of a return to roots thing because they layered in the earlier thrash stuff, the really mathematical stuff, and then the pure roots, like let's play it live, let's do it live, and wrote their most complex record. And then Gent happened and all hell broke loose. And I think some of the stuff that happened after that was sort of a response to like, no, you don't get to do this. We did this. We invented this.
You know how when people try to imitate chemical compounds, like that Delta stuff that people tell you is weed? I'm like, okay. I hear you about it, you know, and yeah, I do have an experience, and yeah, I can like relate it to, I understand why you may have presented this to me as weed related. I get it, right? But it's like when you are making copies of copies of copies and you don't know the kind of equation that it comes from, like that's sort of my, for lack of a better term, like beef with a whole bunch of bands that we're not going to talk about. Because like, it's not, whether it's that they don't understand the math involved in it, or whether it's that they don't understand the id of it. Either way, they don't have a good enough grasp on what's underlying it. And so what they create sounds like a computer trying to like AI its way into a Meshuggah song, you know, with somebody doing bad vocals on top of it or something. It's like, that's so far afield, it doesn't capture whatever's happening, especially inside of ObZen specifically. Like, I want to drop a few of these in here, but like the main or a key thing to know about these tracks in particular is like you have to let yourself be drawn all the way in to get to the best parts. Like they are constantly on this record hiding the best riff at the end of the song. Now, the good part is that the end of the song is describing a portion of music that goes on for minutes, because that's how long an ending is. But like almost 5 minutes into Electric Red, like 4.5 minutes or so into Pineal Gland Optics, and also Pravis or Pravis. I don't know how to say either one of those. But both of them have this like, we've been building and building and building, and you've played this riff a total of like, 6 or 7 times. It's finally done the right math to like line up a few times, and you've gotten your downbeat and all that, and it feels like it's coming back together. And then they will break into something that belongs on like the Nothing record, where they just a total like, oh yeah. And now you're, baking bread in the kitchen and this is on, and you've gone from like smiling because this is interesting to like, you are now like caveman level headbanging involuntarily because of how heavy this riff is at the end of it. And like the payoff is so good from having waited that long for whatever like crazy heavy stuff they're going to do. And even down to on the very last track of the album, Dancers to a Discordant System, you got to get 8 minutes into this thing. And then they hit this groove that just like, whatever the Reddit thread or Reddit community oddly satisfying, like that's how I feel at these different little points, but especially that far into the record.
Extremely abrasive ASMR.
Yeah. Or like to your indica sativa point earlier, The good part about if you do a little too much is that eventually you'll come right back down to the right place, even if you're only there for a minute. And it's like you just get those places over and over in this record where you felt like you didn't really know what was happening. And then they gift you this like last riff that's a lot easier to kind of latch onto. But if they had played it first, you wouldn't have caught it. Like, it's really hard to explain how they like use the complexity to almost like draw you in far enough to where later when they simplify, I mean, you just feel like a genius. Like you cracked the code on this riff all of a sudden because you spent 5 minutes on it.
The other aspect that I like, it sounds disrespectful to say this, but I like didn't count it mentally in the music of Meshuggah. It almost shows up as negative space in my listening experience, is before those last riffs, a lot of the time they do this thing now, maybe starting with this record, maybe starting more in the Catch 33 era, where they back out to the very basics of the main riff, and then they play the opposite of a solo. Right.
I did that pretty well, right?
And I know they say it's inspired by Alan Holdsworth, and you can hear them sort of descending into it if you listen to enough of, if you start with nothing and you hear them sort of reducing solos to the elements, because like guitar solos are a farce if you take them too seriously.
Yep.
They're the dumbest thing alive. You know, it's just pure ego bullshit. So the idea of like a black hole where a solo should be, but what if we did that with a guitar?
Yep.
Is the best thing I can come up with to describe what they're doing with it.
And you know that they can play one, which makes it that much more insulting.
100%. It's almost like the palate cleanser. It's not nothing or ambient at all, but it's a palate cleanser before you get into that last thing. It helps you remember to stand your back up straight and get the cooler, fresher air at the top of the room before you get back into the end thing. It's a sick move structurally on their part.
So I think you said earlier, and I kind of want to reiterate, kind of hoping that we have presented a decent case for getting some folks into this for the first time. Just take the baby step. I do think that, as we've talked about, ObZen is an ideal place to get the kind of booster injection of Meshuggah and what they became. And even though like records since then have been great, there's no problem whatsoever, it's gotten so refined. And this was the place where you really get all of the energy of them transitioning from the mechanical slightly back to the let's play this for real primal, in person. Yeah. And so this is such a good example to kind of see that turn. But if, as we've talked about, it's just not clicking to start with, I do think Nothing is a better entry point if you are hopeful that you can like Meshuggah, but not quite sure about how to make that happen. Nothing's a pretty good place to start, and I don't think we'd be the only or first people to say that. In fact, I think it was their most commercially successful record anyway. It is in no way simple or not Meshuggah, but it's just a little slower, a little easier to parse the main beats of everything, and it really gives you a good feel for what's there. Another angle for, I feel like I may be talking to literally no one on planet Earth, but just in case, if you're looking to make this click in a different way, but what you'd rather do is push more into understanding what's happening. So when we mentioned the drum kit from hell stuff, like all the drum stuff that they've recorded, all the MIDI, like you can literally buy MIDI of Meshuggah drums playing these songs all the way through, like official, like really done correctly, divided out into the different parts of the song and all that. So this is sort of like a shortcut to like watching a million YouTube videos about it. Okay. All the YouTube videos are going to recommend, okay, slow this down and listen to, like, because it's too hard to parse if you don't know what you're listening to. Right. And you start to interpret it incorrectly. And so slow everything down, like way, all the way until you can really seriously like count the notes out. And then speed it back up a little bit. And you start to hear how it, sounds different at speed and all that stuff. But just that idea of like stretching the parts out themselves, if you want to understand them, it's really easy to do that with MIDI. Like one of the reasons I got all that drum kit from Hell stuff when it was around or when I learned about it, I like how I pretended like I bought it. I downloaded the shit out of that to start with and then later bought it. But like one of the cool things about it is you can sit there and just turn down the BPM and just listen really slowly to what's actually being done. And for anyone that I haven't immediately lost, you're going to love it. Like it feels like magic actually, because what you'll see.
And that doesn't just go for Meshuggah.
Yeah.
Slowing
That's
down
fair.
music I like is one of my favorite things to do because it opens it up. I mean, that's a basic tenet of Chopped and Screwed. I'm literally wearing a DJ Screw shirt right now as we talk about this. There are a lot of things about the way they do their thing that remind me of hip hop, like the different amounts of phrasing, different length. It just sounds like bars.
Yeah.
Like when you were talking about, all right, going a 30 or 40 measure phrase before they repeat, the thing that popped into my head was that Black Thought freestyle where he goes for like 11 minutes without turning over or repeating himself. So there's if you're a hip hop fan, I think there's some interesting rhythmic things about Meshuggah to get into. But there was a YouTube video of a song from the Love Below. I want to say it was She Lives in My Lap, where they slowed it down from basically like 45 RPM speed to 33 RPM, whatever that pitch shift is.
Mm-hmm.
And it became a totally different song with a different agenda and feel. And you're just like, oh, a good song. Every one of them has many lives within it on different timelines with different planets of gravity, weight.
I'm going to pull you into the Marvel Cinematic Universe one way or another every day.
Doctor Strange me. Oh no. Does that make me Peter Parker in this? Because if so, I quit. So if you have no takeaway from this other than that, do that.
Yeah.
Take all your favorite songs and slow them down a lot and just listen to them that way and only that way for like a week straight. It's a fun listening and discovery experiment. But Meshuggah is a super rad band to chop and screw.
The reason it's worth the extra nerd work to get the drums separate is a theme that exists for sure on ObZen, but also across previous records. One of the reasons Meshuggah sounds so absolutely confrontationally ridiculous is like the true down tuning and like 7 and 8 string guitars that they were also, we didn't even mention that. Like that was another thing that they literally started doing before anyone else did, and then changed the way that music worked. Mm-hmm. Because when I'm almost positive that it's Catch 33, so we're going to go with it. But they were trying to transition from 7 to 8 string guitars. They were having to have them custom made because they basically did not exist, but they wanted to be able to play a lower, I think it's an F. Okay. And so as the story goes, at least like their handmade special guitars that they were supposed to be using didn't get built in time or couldn't work or whatever. They couldn't get the guitars, but they still wanted it to sound that way. So, man, you're really going to have to go with me on this, but like they took the 7 string guitars that they had and down tuned them to try to match what the 8 string would be. But, okay, the way that guitar tensions work is like you need a longer neck to accommodate that. Otherwise, the string continually down tunes. So what you're actually hearing a lot of in their guitar recording on that record is the guitar itself constantly being down tuned and retuned as it's recorded over and over again. So like you get this jarring feeling of it being like this kind of note that's hard to place, almost like whatever Torch talks about these days, the note Z.
The boom note.
The boom note, yeah.
Tuned to Z.
Yeah.
So good.
So that's at least one of the reasons to be careful just slowing down Meshuggah as a whole, because by the time you down tune that to slow it down, you'll sound like mud.
Yeah.
And so the drum separation helps you again, because as you'll see, if you try to listen to it actively, like guitars and other parts that lay on top are going to mislead you. And so it can really help to find out, like just getting the MIDI for the bleed kick drum part, realizing it's just da 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 da. Okay. And now I can start to speed it back up, and I got it again. And now you've got this really annoying finger tap thing that you're going to start doing on the dinner table, and everyone's going to hate you for it. Which I would, yeah.
The metal version of Grindin' by Clips in the lunchroom. The hip hop analogies work. They work. The beat.
So Nothing's a great place to start if you want to check out the music. Looking into how the band existed and how it's impacted music culturally is another cool place to look, even if you don't like the music. So like the stuff we've talked about already, just like down-tuned 7 and 8 string guitars, playing drums on MIDI, writing music asynchronously, allowing yourself to write other musicians' parts for them after they've already written them. Like just learning more about that stuff and then going and looking for like the research papers, which I feel like there's no greater example of science and what it thinks about itself other than all of these research papers existing with about these like complex mathematical outcomes of Meshuggah. And if you go back and you ask them how they got there, they say, we just wrote it in 4/4, dude. I don't know what to tell you, you know? And like, there's just this like,
no, Virginia, there is no Santa Claus.
Yeah. It's like this whole mystery of the universe thing that we feel like exists because we're able to analyze it on this level, but it comes from just repetitive simplicity with slight variation over and over and like a lot of patience, which is maybe a thing we could take away in our lives from time to time that might produce different results than we expect. Not to like overstretch this, but like I feel like that kind of contributes to like that. If I get better at something 1% every day, over time, that becomes like exponential growth and change. And I'm going to talk about self-improvement shit because like you're fine the way you are, right? But like anything you want to change or see different, it's those small accumulated variations over time. Like the first time you ever saw somebody put a line on an XY graph and then do 2 more lines and then you go, oh, that creates like a curve. And then they start to lay enough of them up there where you can't tell that they're individual lines at all. It's like, well, Meshuggah has made a spider web of 20 years of exactly that. Just like string everywhere. And now it's created this pattern. And you're trying to find out what the origins of it were. And they're like, well, it was a string. So like, this is the wrong way to look at it, you know, just like lay in it instead and enjoy whatever got created. So yeah, it's been fun to just try to like intellectually explore like what kind of engages us about this music, because and I won't speak for you if you disagree, but there's a type of connection to Meshuggah that exists that not better or worse, but it's significantly different than Maggot Brain. You know, like they're both music.
Yeah.
They're both impressive feats of strength, and they both have like a brutality to them and an energy and like a complexity, but they are so of different types that it feels absurd to think of them as the same type of art at all. And like, to me, that's what sort of makes this whole rabbit hole worth dipping a toe into.
I agree with you 100%. If I had to try to sum it up, I think the childlike, pure feeling of learning and loving learning, the math and the magic of Meshuggah distilled taps into that same pleasure center in your brain. It feels like learning. It feels like your brain growing and developing new wrinkles in real time. Whereas Maggot Brain just helps you shake your ass better. Mostly. I mean, your brain grows, but your ass grows too. It follows. So I guess coming back to my original point somewhat, like, if you are excited by the prospect of creativity as a thing, as a wonderful capability of the human species, if you need something to jumpstart your year, your brain, whatever, this is a new direction that you can take it in. You certainly can leave it after that, but hopefully we have encouraged you, most of all, just to take it.
Go to tunedig.com for your chance to win a free vinyl copy of the album we just covered. And follow us on Instagram and Twitter for even more info about the album, including playlists, links to interesting articles and videos, and even some stories that didn't make the episode. Most importantly, though, please support your favorite local record store or concert venue, or buy merch from a band you love. Thanks for listening.